Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. This is joint work with Renske Kaiser at Erasmus University, Rotterdam. And indeed, so we look at austerity and family stress in Great Britain. I think this for a little bit of context, but just a figure from data from Cooper and Hills on decline in per child benefit expenditure in Great Britain, sort of as a result of austerity measures in the last decade or so. And I should have mentioned more about the context of that, I guess, in this conference. But we start from here in examining whether these reforms and these cuts in the per child benefit expenditure resulted in changes in family well-being. And I think there are four contributions that we attempt to make in this paper. The first one is to analyze what happens to family well-being when families encounter income losses and income losses due to welfare cutbacks. So most of previous studies have looked at job and income loss rather than income loss per se. And some of the consequences of job loss, such as divorce or changes in mental health, are partly independent from income loss, according to previous studies. So we know little about the role of income loss per se, and many studies have looked at income boosts due to welfare expansion. So we try and see if effects are symmetrical when there are income losses due to welfare cuts. She already introduced this. It's also our theoretical framework on family stress. So the idea that financial hardship may spill over into family well-being in terms of parental mental health, parent-child relationships and parenting, and eventually spill over onto children's development. And most previous studies have looked at parental investments of time and money as a consequence of income shocks, whereas we are pretty much focused on the stress channel here. Also, a third contribution is about the role of fathers and mothers. Previous research has mainly looked at how families respond to income shocks, looking at maternal changes, for example, in maternal mental health, whereas thanks to understanding society data, we can look at both mothers and fathers, similarities and differences. And finally, we focus on children during adolescence. And here as well, most studies have looked into either the effects of family income in early childhood or long-term when children are adults, they're completed education, for example. And adolescence is perhaps a missing middle where we don't know as much about the effects of income changes for children. So to clarify what our paper is about, we look at the intergenerational effects of tax benefit reform in Great Britain in the last decade or so. Great Britain, so I should already mention that we couldn't match some of our data for Northern Ireland, so just Great Britain. And here you can see more in detail what kinds of austerity measures we are looking at. That would be changes to the legacy system, so the 6 core programs in the British safety net and child benefit. They mostly accrue to families with children, so justifying our focus in what happened to families with children after these reforms. Most, but not all of these reforms touched on programs that are means tested, and therefore we expect this might disproportionately affect families with lower incomes. And finally, most of these changes have been temporary, perhaps for 3 years or 4 years, and to programs that are unconditional to child-related investments. So parents do not have to spend, for example, child benefit necessarily into their children. And previous research suggests that this kind of programs and whatever happens to these programs shouldn't impact children as much as conditional programs and more long-term measures. So here we look at temporary unconditional programs and see if indeed those have little consequences or not. And this could be relevant also in the context of the current pandemic with lots of temporary measures that then expire or are expanded and so on and so forth. So we use Understanding Society waves 1 to 10 for the decade between 2009 to 2019. And thanks to local authority districts identifiers, we can match understanding society to previous data on tax benefit reform compiled by Beatty and Fothergill. So here's pretty much our the structure of our data. We start from the tax benefit reform data, and then that is matched to understanding society based on districts. And I'll say something more about the matching soon. And basically, we identify in understanding society those that might be exposed to the different reforms we look at. And to those, we assign this intensity of benefit reform by district compiled by previous research. Again, I will say something more about it later on. And basically, we have two samples then. We have a sample of adolescents from the youth questionnaire. So these are children aged 10 to 15. To whom we match their parents in the main questionnaire. And you can see the sample sizes there. Before saying a little bit more about the measure of tax benefit reform, how do we define family stress? We look first at parental outcomes. The idea is that income loss due to austerity measures might spill over into family well-being, and particularly hurt mental health. We use both GHQ-12 and SF-12 standard measures of mental health there. And this spillover might occur via financial hardship caused by income loss, and again, from tax benefit reform. And we look at financial hardship in terms of arrears in rent and bills, in terms of food expenditures, and subjective evaluation of whether the household is living comfortably or just getting by or finding it difficult. And here in green, you see also that we look at other outcomes, parental labor supply and benefit received earnings to see if there's a compensation for income loss via paid work, basically, or other channels. Then we look at parent-child interactions, the chances of quarreling and talking about things that matter with both mothers and fathers. These are crude indicators, so we can also rely on much more detailed measures of parenting styles, but these are only limited to children aged 10. And finally, via the channels of financial hardship, of parental mental health, and then parent-child interactions, we expect detrimental effects on children, and particularly their socio-emotional development in terms of internalizing and externalizing problems. So a little bit more about the assignment to the different reforms and different reform intensity. So for example, looking at tax credits reform in 2011, what we did is identify tax credits recipients up to April 2011. If, for example, the household resides in Liverpool, we assign the yearly loss for Liverpool residents from the Beatty and Fothergill data starting from April 2011. That would be around £900. So these are all the reforms we look at and group together. You can see that given that we are looking at a sample of parents and of adolescent children, most of the records pertain to recipients of tax credits and child benefit as well. The data is large enough to capture some of the families also affected, for example, by benefit cap in both 2013 and 2016 expansion as well. And basically what we do is therefore identify recipients of these different benefits that might have been exposed to the different reforms and use the simulated data from Beatty and Fothergill that we assign to those parents as an instrumental variable for the observed income loss. So we have the external data from tax benefit reform, and we leverage that to estimate the causal effect of income loss using an instrumental variable approach. And the variable that is instrumented for is benefit income loss as measured in understanding society. And this is also only for the benefits covered by the 6 programs I've just shown you. So legacy plus child benefit. We sum them up and compute changes in benefit income over time and single out losses, which is our focus. And as usual, with this kind of empirical approach, there are some assumptions here for identification. I just want to mention that, as one might expect, simulated losses strongly predict observed losses. So we are confident that we are capturing the effects of income losses due to austerity reform. And also, we understand that reforms occurred over time, and there could be time-dependent outcome trajectories. So we net them out. You can see here if you via in point 2, age, period, group retrend, and also given that our measures are district-specific, we want to identify change over time net of time constant district characteristics. So we also add district fixed effects. So onto our main results. You can see in panel A for parents, a decline in maternal mental health according to both measures as a consequence of benefit income loss. These are estimates for a 1,000 pounds benefit income loss, and on average in lower income families, the losses that we estimate are 3 times that. So you have to multiply then the coefficients for that. Effects on paternal mental health instead are not detected and are much smaller in size. And we trace back these effects on maternal mental health in particular to financial hardship. And you can see, again, in panel A, an increase in rent and bills arrears for both mothers and fathers. The difference in rent arrears between mothers and fathers is mainly due to single mothers, driving the estimate for mothers in terms of rent. Also a decline in food expenditure, but I'll say something more about it in a second, only among mothers, and an increase in financial worry for a 1,000 pound benefit income loss for both mothers and fathers. And in panel B, we see that children's socio-emotional development also suffer, therefore, as a consequence of benefit income loss, with increases in both internalizing and externalizing problems. But evidence on, let's say, the most proximate channel, parent-child interactions at the bottom of panel B, is more mixed. So it will be helpful to look into the more detailed measures of parenting styles here. But I can say that we find, for example, evidence of a decrease in the chances of talking about things that matter with the study child father, but also decreasing chances of quarreling with the study child father, particularly for girls. Although there's more noise here, and again, parenting styles measures will be more detailed on this. Before looking at those, though, I should say that are these estimates large? Well, in terms of, for example, effects on children, they are quite symmetrical to studies on income boosts. So we find that there's a symmetry here with the study of income loss to what was found in previous studies. On financial hardship, if we take a typical 3,000 pounds loss and the baseline in terms of arrears, for example, from the first wave, our estimates imply a 16% increase in bills arrears and a 58% increase in rent arrears for mothers as a consequence of benefit income loss. And last, we also, as I said, try to cover all bases possible with understanding society data. In panel A, we look at whether perhaps in response to income loss, parents change their employment. We find small effects on the chances of being employed or not, of around 1 percentage point. And but especially when it comes to earnings, we do not find a one-to-one exchange between the benefit income loss and additional earnings, or at all, especially for mothers. So we do not find evidence that earnings compensated for benefit income loss in our sample. And in terms of parenting, with the more detailed measures of warmth, harshness, and consistency, we find results consistent with the family stress model of an increase in maternal harshness and a decrease in warmth and consistency for fathers, again, that we impute causally, given our strategy, to benefit income loss. These are changes that would not have occurred if not for benefit income loss in terms of parenting. Yeah, and I can skip the sensitivity because of time. I guess there will be time for that in the discussion. In terms of conclusions, then, we study income loss across generations spurred by austerity measures in the last decade in Great Britain, and find causal evidence of the sort of pathways of family stress. So going from financial hardship in terms of arrears, and then moving on to parental mental health, to parenting and finally to children's socio-emotional development. We find some differences in terms of health and parenting in the responses of mothers and fathers. And most of all, we find finding effects on adolescents suggests that adolescence is still a sensitive period, sensitive to income shocks when it comes to children's development. So we think our study highlights the intergenerational toll of austerity agendas, though limited to parents of adolescent children in our study, can inform the design of family cash transfers, and in particular during adolescence, as that could be a sensitive period. And also, given that we looked at temporary measures, we suggest that also temporary measures during the pandemic, such as the uplift to universal credits, its expiration perhaps in September, those can also affect family well-being based on our results here. And on time, yeah. Thank you for listening to me, and the working paper is available in case you're interested at this link. Thanks.